Captain Jake Morrison stared at the readings on his screen and felt his stomach drop. The USS Defiance had been tracking a strange energy signal for 3 days now, and it had led them far beyond any known space routes. The signal was unlike anything in human databases, pulsing with a rhythm that almost seemed alive. Jake had been exploring unknown space for 15 years, but this felt different. This felt important. "Captain, we're picking up multiple contacts ahead," called out Lieutenant Kelly Brooks from her position at the sensor station. Her voice carried a note of excitement mixed with concern. "Whatever's out there, it's big." Jake leaned forward in his command chair and studied the tactical display. Dozens of ships appeared on the screen, arranged in perfect geometric patterns, around what looked like a massive space station. The ships were elegant and smooth, nothing like the angular military vessels humans built. They seemed to flow rather than cut through space. "Any response to our hails?" Jake asked his communications officer. "Nothing yet, sir, but wait." The young officer pressed his earpiece closer and frowned. "I'm getting something now. It's not coming through our normal channels. It's like they're speaking directly into my head." Before Jake could respond, every human on the bridge suddenly heard a voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The voice was gentle and warm, like a favorite teacher speaking to beloved students. "Greetings, travelers from the small blue world. We are the Galactic Collective, keepers of peace across 12 star systems. You have wandered far from your home, little ones. Do not fear. We welcome you with open hearts and minds." Jake exchanged glances with his crew. In all his years of first contact protocols, nobody had ever called humans little ones before. Most species they encountered were either hostile or indifferent. This was something entirely new. "This is Captain Jake Morrison of the human vessel USS Defiance," he replied aloud, hoping they could hear him. "We come in peace, seeking knowledge and friendship among the stars." The response came immediately, still in that same gentle tone. "How wonderful that you speak of peace, young captain. This tells us much about your species. We sense great potential in your people. Would you honor us by accepting an invitation to our world? There is much we would share with you." Jake felt his crew looking at him expectantly. First contact was supposed to be handled by diplomats and scientists, not ship captains on routine exploration missions. But the opportunity was too important to pass up. "We would be honored to visit your world," he replied. 3 hours later, the USS Defiance found itself surrounded by a fleet of collective ships, but not as prisoners. The alien vessels moved around them like a guard of honor, their hulls shimmering with soft light. Jake watched in amazement as they approached a planet that seemed too beautiful to be real. Serenity Prime hung in space like a jewel, its surface covered in gleaming crystal cities connected by streams of flowing water. Floating islands drifted through the atmosphere, covered in gardens that sparkled with colors humans had no names for. There were no signs of industry or pollution, no military installations or defensive weapons. Everything seemed designed for beauty and peace. When the news of first contact reached Earth, President Linda Hayes found herself facing the biggest decision in human history. She sat in the Oval Office with her most trusted advisors, studying the initial reports from Captain Morrison. The images from Serenity Prime were breathtaking, but it was the cultural data that truly amazed them. "They claim to have eliminated war completely," reported Dr. Alan Webb, Earth's top xenobiologist, who had been studying the preliminary data. Not just on their homeworld, but across their entire alliance. 12 different species, all living in perfect harmony for over 3,000 years. General Ben Carter, a grizzled veteran of the Mars colonial wars, shook his head. "No species eliminates war, Mr. President. They just get better at hiding it. I've seen what happens when people claim they don't fight anymore. Usually means someone else is doing the fighting for them." President Hayes studied the reports carefully. The collective was offering humanity immediate membership in their alliance, access to technologies that could solve hunger, disease, and poverty overnight. Clean energy that could power Earth for 1,000,000 years. Medical advances that could extend human life indefinitely. Transportation systems that made interstellar travel as easy as taking a bus across town. "The question is," she said finally, "what do they want in return?" That question would be answered by Ambassador Claire Davis, a brilliant diplomat who had successfully negotiated peace treaties in 3 different colonial disputes. She would lead humanity's first official mission to collective space, accompanied by a small military escort under Colonel Sam Rodriguez. Her job was to learn everything possible about these peaceful aliens and determine whether humanity should join their alliance. 3 weeks later, Ambassador Davis stood on the observation deck of the diplomatic vessel UES Harmony and watched Serenity Prime grow larger in the viewport. Beside her, Colonel Rodriguez checked his sidearm for the 100th time, his soldier's instincts warning him that something about this situation felt wrong. "Remember," Davis said quietly, "we're here to learn, not to judge. These people have achieved something humans have dreamed of for centuries. Maybe we can learn from them." Rodriguez nodded, but his hand never moved far from his weapon. "Maybe, ma'am. But in my experience, when something seems too good to be true, it usually is." As their ship entered the planet's atmosphere, both humans got their first close look at collective society. The cities below were indeed beautiful, but they noticed something strange. Every building looked exactly the same. Every street followed the same pattern. Every garden contained the same flowers arranged in identical designs. It was perfect, but it was also perfectly uniform. The landing ceremony was unlike anything humans had ever experienced. Thousands of beings from different species gathered to welcome them, but they all moved in perfect synchronization. They all spoke in the same gentle tone. They all smiled the same peaceful smile. It was beautiful and terrifying at the same time. Ambassador Feltar, the Zenthari diplomat who would serve as their guide, approached with arms spread wide in welcome. His species looked almost human, but his eyes held an odd, distant quality, as if he was seeing something far away rather than focusing on the present moment. "Welcome, friends from Earth," he said in that same warm voice they had heard in space. "You have traveled far to find peace. Now peace has found you. Come, let us show you the wonders of a world without conflict, without competition, without the burdens that weigh down less enlightened species." As they followed Veltar deeper into the Crystal City, neither Davis nor Rodriguez noticed the subtle humming that seemed to come from the very walls around them, or the way their own thoughts seemed to grow calmer and more peaceful with each step they took. 3 months had passed since the first diplomatic exchange began, and Dr. Alan Webb was starting to understand why his stomach felt uneasy every morning on Serenity Prime. The xenobiologist had been given unprecedented access to collective medical facilities and genetic databases, ostensibly to study the fascinating biology of the 12 allied species. What he found instead made his blood run cold. Webb sat in his temporary laboratory staring at genetic sequences that told a story the collective had never intended to share. Every species in the Alliance showed clear signs of genetic modification, going back hundreds of generations. Specific genes related to aggression, competition, and individual ambition had been systematically suppressed or eliminated entirely. It was not evolution, as the collective claimed. It was deliberate genetic engineering on a massive scale. "They lobotomized themselves," he whispered to his research assistant, Dr. Patricia Kane, who had arrived with the second wave of human scientists. "Every single species gave up the parts of their DNA that made them want to compete, to fight, to strive for something better." Kane looked over the data with growing horror. As Earth's leading xenopsychologist, she understood the implications better than most. "This explains the behavior patterns we've been observing. No species naturally develops this level of uniform thinking. They've been modified to be incapable of disagreement." Their conversation was interrupted by Lieutenant Kelly Brooks, who burst into the lab with an expression of panic. She had been assigned to the security detail protecting the human delegation, and her 3 months among the collective had left her increasingly frustrated with their customs and restrictions. "Doctors, you need to see what just happened in the cultural center," she said breathlessly. "I think I might have started an incident." Webb and Kane followed Brooks to the main plaza, where a crowd of collective citizens had gathered around what appeared to be the aftermath of a demonstration gone wrong. Ambassador Veltar was kneeling beside another Zenthari who was clutching his arm and making soft whimpering sounds. "What happened here?" Webb asked, immediately switching to his medical training. Brooks looked embarrassed and angry at the same time. "They asked me to demonstrate human physical arts. I was showing them basic self-defense moves, nothing aggressive, just how to block and redirect an attack. That Zenthari wanted to try it, so I grabbed his arm to show him a simple throw. I barely used any force at all, but he screamed like I had broken every bone in his body." Webb examined the injured alien and found nothing more than a slight bruise. The Zenthari was trembling and staring at Brooks as if she were a dangerous predator. Around them, other collective citizens whispered among themselves in their usual, synchronized manner, but their voices carried a note of fear that had not been there before. Ambassador Veltar stood slowly, his face showing an expression humans had never seen on a collective citizen before. It took a moment for Webb to recognize what he was seeing. It was anger, but anger filtered through a mind that had no framework for processing such emotions. "Your species practices violence for pleasure," Veltar said, his gentle voice now carrying an edge of something that might have been accusation. "You deliberately cause pain to members of your own species and call it training. This is beyond our understanding." Ambassador Davis arrived just as the situation was escalating. She had been in meetings with the Collective Council all morning, trying to explain human concepts of controlled conflict and healthy competition. The translation: algorithms were struggling with ideas that simply did not exist in collective languages. "Ambassador Veltar," she said calmly, "this is a misunderstanding. Lieutenant Brooks was demonstrating defensive techniques, not violence. In human culture, we believe that learning to protect ourselves and others is a form of care, not aggression. Protection implies threat," Veltar replied, his voice becoming more mechanical as he retreated into collective programming. "Threat implies conflict. Conflict implies failure of peaceful resolution. Your species has not yet learned to live without the primitive urges that drive lesser beings to harm one another." The crowd began to disperse, but Webb noticed something troubling. Several of the younger collective citizens lingered, their eyes fixed on Brooks with an expression he had never seen before. It was not fear, it was curiosity. They were fascinated by the idea that someone could be strong enough to cause harm but choose not to. That evening, the human delegation gathered in their assigned quarters to discuss the day's events. The rooms were beautiful, carved from living crystal that provided gentle illumination and perfect climate control. But Webb noticed that there were no locks on the doors, no way to ensure privacy. The collective had never needed such things because their citizens never disagreed or acted against group interests. "We need to be more careful," Davis said, reviewing her notes from the day's diplomatic sessions. "The collective is starting to question whether humanity is suitable for alliance membership. They're beginning to see our natural behaviors as symptoms of an undeveloped civilization." Colonel Rodriguez, who had been unusually quiet since arriving on Serenity Prime, finally spoke up. "Ma'am, with respect, I think we're missing the bigger picture here. I've been monitoring communications and energy patterns around the city. There are massive installations under every major population center, broadcasting some kind of signal at frequencies that affect brain chemistry." Webb looked up sharply. That would explain the genetic modifications. They're not just breeding out aggressive tendencies anymore. They're actively suppressing them with technology. Kane pulled up her psychological evaluation reports on her portable computer. "It fits with what I've been observing. Collective citizens show all the signs of chronic chemical suppression of normal emotional responses. They're not peaceful by choice. They're peaceful because they've been made incapable of feeling the emotions that drive conflict." The implications hit the room like a physical blow. Davis stared at her team, realizing that they were not dealing with an advanced, peaceful civilization. They were looking at the end result of systematic mind control on a galactic scale. "If this is true," she said slowly, "then every species that joins the collective doesn't just give up war. They give up the ability to choose war. They give up the ability to choose anything." Their discussion was interrupted by a soft chiming sound, that seemed to come from the walls themselves. A holographic projection of Ambassador Veltar appeared in the center of the room, smiling his gentle, empty smile. "Greetings, human friends," he said in his calm voice. "We hope you are finding your accommodation satisfactory. We have been analyzing the incident from today and have determined that Lieutenant Brooks requires corrective therapy to address her violent tendencies. We have scheduled her for treatment beginning tomorrow morning." The projection vanished before anyone could respond, leaving the humans staring at each other in growing horror. Rodriguez was the first to break the silence. "Ma'am, I recommend we evacuate immediately. If they try to put any of our people through their treatment, we might not get them back intact." But Davis was thinking about the bigger picture. Somewhere back on Earth, President Hayes and the Security Council were waiting for her report. They were expecting her to recommend whether humanity should join the most powerful alliance in known space, gain access to technology beyond their wildest dreams, and finally achieve the peace that had eluded them for centuries. She thought about the young collective citizens who had watched Brooks with such curiosity. She thought about the genetic modifications that had stripped away the very essence of what made a species unique. She thought about the neural suppression fields that made sure no one could ever choose to be different. "No," she said finally, "we're not evacuating yet. But tomorrow we're going to show them something they've never seen before. We're going to show them what it looks like when someone says no." Outside their quarters, in the perfect crystal corridors of Serenity Prime, hidden sensors recorded every word they spoke. The Collective Council would spend the night analyzing this data, trying to understand how a species could be so fundamentally broken that they would choose conflict over peace, struggle over contentment, uncertainty over the perfect order they offered. They would not understand until it was far too late that what they saw as broken, humans saw as freedom. The emergency session of the United Nations Security Council had been running for 6 hours when President Linda Hayes finally called for a break. The holographic displays around the conference room showed data streams from the collective delegation, and every piece of evidence painted the same disturbing picture. Humanity had discovered the most powerful civilization in the galaxy, and that civilization maintained its power through systematic mind control. General Ben Carter stood at the main display, pointing to neural mapping data that Dr. Webb had transmitted from Serenity Prime. "Every major population center has these installations," he explained to the assembled leaders. "They broadcast frequencies that suppress aggression, independent thought, and what we would consider normal emotional responses. The collective doesn't just invite species to join them, they fundamentally alter what those species are." Secretary of State Margaret Foster leaned forward in her chair. "The question is, what do we do about it? We can't fight them. Their technology is centuries ahead of ours, and we can't simply ignore them. They've already made contact." Admiral Lisa Chen, commander of Earth Space Forces, had been studying tactical assessments all morning. "We could withdraw our people and close our borders," she suggested. "Build up our defenses and hope they leave us alone." "That won't work," interrupted Dr. Nina Foster, the mission's lead psychologist who had been monitoring the situation from Earth. "The collective doesn't understand the concept of voluntary isolation. In their worldview, any species that refuses their peace must be suffering from the same violent impulses they've spent millennia eliminating. They'll see our withdrawal as a cry for help." President Hayes studied the faces around the table. These were the most capable people on Earth, and they were all struggling with the same impossible problem. How do you deal with an enemy that genuinely believes they're saving you? "There is another option," said Dr. Patricia Kane, speaking from her remote link to Serenity Prime. Her image flickered slightly due to the distance, but her voice was clear and determined. "We don't fight them, and we don't run from them. We show them what they've lost." The room fell silent as Kane continued. "The collective has spent 3,000 years convinced that their way is the only path to advancement. They've never encountered a species that chose to keep their competitive instincts, their drive to excel, their willingness to struggle for something better. We could demonstrate what humans can achieve precisely because we haven't given up those qualities they consider primitive." General Carter frowned. "You're talking about some kind of cultural exchange?" Doctor, these people have technology that could sterilize Earth from orbit. This isn't a time for academic discussions. No, Kane replied firmly. I'm talking about competition. Real competition. The collective has no framework for understanding how conflict and struggle actually make a species stronger. They've never seen what happens when you channel aggressive instincts into positive growth. We could show them. President Hayes felt something click into place. You're suggesting we challenge them? Exactly. Not to war, but to contests of skill, creativity, problem-solving, and achievement. Show them that human aggression, properly directed, leads to innovation and excellence that their peaceful stagnation could never match. Admiral Chen looked skeptical. And you think they'll agree to this? Dr. Foster smiled grimly. They have, too. The collective philosophy is based on the idea that all paths lead to greater understanding. They can't refuse what they see as a learning opportunity, even if they don't understand what they might learn. 3 days later, Captain Ryan Taylor received orders that would have seemed impossible just a week earlier. The UES Sovereign, Earth's most advanced exploration vessel, was being converted into something that had never existed before, a ship designed not for war or diplomacy, but for demonstration of human excellence. Taylor walked through the modified cargo bays where his new crew was settling in. Instead of soldiers or scientists, the Sovereign now carried Earth's finest representatives of human achievement. Chess Grandmaster Carlos Rivera was setting up equipment to interface with collective logic systems. Olympic champion Maria Gonzalez was training in modified gravity fields. Engineer Frank Miller was reviewing technical challenges that the collective claimed were unsolvable. Captain, called Dr. Helen Roberts from the Science Bay, I've been analyzing the data from the collective's technological achievements. They're impressive, but they're also oddly limited. Everything they build follows the same safe, predictable patterns. There's no innovation, no creative leaps, no willingness to take risks that might lead to failure. Taylor nodded as he reviewed the mission parameters. The plan was audacious in its simplicity. They would return to collective space and formally request a series of exchanges designed to promote mutual understanding. The collective would demonstrate their achievements, and humans would demonstrate theirs. What the collective didn't understand was that every human demonstration would be an act of controlled aggression, channeled competitive instinct, and the kind of risk-taking that their modified minds could no longer comprehend. Artist and designer. Maria Gonzalez was working on pieces that would showcase human creativity. Her paintings incorporated elements of conflict, struggle, and triumph that collective art had abandoned centuries ago. They paint pretty pictures, she explained to Taylor, but they've forgotten how to create art that makes people feel something powerful. Philosopher and strategist Dr. Alan Foster was preparing arguments that would challenge the fundamental assumptions of collective society. They've achieved peace by eliminating choice, he said. They've avoided conflict by making conflict impossible. But they've also eliminated growth, innovation, and the possibility of becoming something greater than they were. The most important member of the crew was Dr. Nina Foster, whose job would be to monitor the psychological impact of human demonstrations on collective citizens. Early reports from Ambassador Davis suggested that younger collective members were beginning to show signs of curiosity about human behaviors, despite the neural suppression systems. The key, Foster explained to the assembled crew, is that we're not trying to convert them to our way of thinking. We're trying to remind them that thinking is a choice. Every competition we win, every problem we solve, every creative work we produce will be evidence that the qualities they've suppressed are not weaknesses to be eliminated, but strengths to be channeled. As the Sovereign approached the edge of collective space, Taylor received a transmission from Ambassador Davis. Her voice carried a note of exhaustion, but also excitement. Captain, the situation here is evolving rapidly. Lieutenant Brooks has refused to undergo their corrective therapy, and her defiance is causing ripples throughout their society. Some of the younger collective citizens are asking questions they've never asked before. Questions about choice, about strength, about what they might be capable of if they weren't constantly being pacified. How is the collective leadership responding? Taylor asked. They're confused and increasingly concerned. Ambassador Veltar keeps talking about the need to help us overcome our violent nature, but I can see doubt in his eyes. For the first time in his life, he's encountering ideas that their philosophy can't easily dismiss. Taylor felt the familiar rush of adrenaline that came before any challenging mission. But this was different from military operations he had led before. This time they weren't fighting to destroy an enemy. They were fighting to wake up a friend who had forgotten how to dream. Understood, Ambassador. We'll be there in 18 hours. Tell the collective we're coming to participate in cultural exchanges that will promote mutual understanding and growth. Tell them we're bringing examples of human achievement that we hope will inspire greater cooperation between our species. And what do I tell them when they ask what you're really bringing? Taylor smiled as he looked around at his extraordinary crew, each one representing the pinnacle of human achievement in their field. Tell them we're bringing everything they gave up to achieve peace. Tell them we're bringing the competition, the struggle, the willingness to fail and try again that makes true advancement possible. Tell them we're bringing hope. The Sovereign accelerated toward collective space, carrying aboard it something that had never before threatened the galaxy's most powerful civilization. It carried the possibility that peace achieved through suppression was not peace at all, but merely the absence of the conflicts that drive all living things to become more than they were. The galaxy was about to discover what humans had always known, that the greatest achievements come not from avoiding the struggle but from embracing it. The first competition took place in the Grand Assembly Hall of Serenity Prime, a crystalline amphitheater that could hold 50,000 spectators. What started as a simple demonstration of human chess had evolved into something the collective had never witnessed before. Thousands of beings choosing to watch an event where someone would win and someone would lose. Carlos Rivera sat across from Nexus Prime, the collective's most advanced strategic intelligence. The massive quantum computer had never lost a logical contest in over 800 years. Its processing power exceeded human capability by factors that should have made the match impossible. But Rivera understood something the collective had forgotten. Chess was not just about logic. Your move, Rivera said calmly, having just sacrificed his queen in what appeared to be a catastrophic blunder. Nexus Prime processed over 1 million possible continuations in the space of a heartbeat, but could find no logical reason for Rivera's move. The sacrifice seemed to serve no strategic purpose, created no tactical advantage, and violated every principle of optimal play. The computer spent precious processing cycles trying to understand what it had missed. Rivera smiled and moved his remaining knight into position. Checkmate in 3 moves, he announced. The silence in the amphitheater was absolute. In the audience, Ambassador Veltar felt something he had not experienced in decades. Confusion that was not immediately resolved by collective consensus. Around him, other collective citizens were experiencing similar sensations. The neural suppression fields that normally soothed such feelings seemed unable to process what they had just witnessed. Impossible, whispered a young Xanthari scientist. The computer analyzed every possible outcome. How could the human see something that Nexus Prime could not? Rivera stood and bowed respectfully to his defeated opponent. Your computer played perfectly according to logic, he explained to the watching crowd. But chess is not purely logical. It requires intuition, creativity, and the willingness to make moves that seem wrong, but feel right. These are qualities that logic alone cannot replicate. Dr. Nina Foster watched from the diplomatic section as something unprecedented happened throughout the amphitheater. Collective citizens were talking to each other without first achieving consensus. They were expressing individual opinions about what they had seen. The neural suppression systems designed to prevent exactly this kind of independent thinking seemed to be struggling against the sheer novelty of the situation. The competitions escalated rapidly after that first victory. Maria Gonzalez challenged collective athletes to contests that showcased not just physical capability, but the human drive to exceed previous limits. Where collective sports were designed for harmonious participation with predetermined outcomes, human athletics celebrated the struggle to be faster, stronger, better than before. Why do you push yourselves to the point of pain? asked a Draconi observer after watching Gonzalez break 3 separate records in a single afternoon. Because pain is the price of growth, she replied, breathing heavily but smiling. Every time we push past what we thought was possible, we discover we're capable of more than we knew. Your people have eliminated pain, but you've also eliminated the joy of overcoming it. Engineer Frank Miller was making even more dramatic impacts in the technical demonstrations. Given access to collective laboratories, he approached problems that their scientists had classified as unsolvable for centuries. But where collective research proceeded through careful consensus and established protocols, Miller relied on hunches, creative leaps, and the willingness to fail spectacularly in pursuit of breakthrough innovations. This approach is highly irregular, observed Chief Scientist Kethvar as Miller began his third completely different attempt at solving a quantum resonance problem. Our procedures require extensive theoretical modeling before any practical experimentation. Your procedures guarantee that you'll never find solutions your models can't predict, Miller replied, adjusting his jury-rigged experimental apparatus. Sometimes the best discoveries come from trying things that shouldn't work but do anyway. When Miller's unconventional approach yielded results that had eluded collective science for 800 years, something shifted in the watching scientists. For the first time in generations, collective researchers began to question whether their methodical, consensus-driven approach might be limiting their potential for discovery. But it was the artistic demonstrations that created the most profound impact. Maria Gonzalez had been commissioned to create a series of works that would showcase human creativity for collective audiences. What she produced challenged every assumption about art that the collective had developed over 3 millennia. Her paintings depicted struggle, conflict, triumph, and loss with an emotional intensity that collective art had abandoned long ago. Where their artistic traditions focused on harmony and peaceful contemplation, Gonzalez created works that demanded emotional response, that challenged viewers to feel something powerful and immediate. This piece disturbs me, admitted a Vorthan, cultural observer, staring at a painting that showed a human figure climbing a mountain against fierce winds. It makes me feel restless, as if I should be doing something instead of simply observing. That's exactly the point, Gonzalez explained. Art should challenge you, inspire you, make you want to be more than you are. If it just makes you feel peaceful, it's not really art. It's decoration. Dr. Helen Roberts was achieving similar breakthroughs in the scientific exchanges. Her research methodology shocked collective scientists with its willingness to pursue seemingly illogical directions based on intuitive hunches. Where they required extensive committee approval for any new research direction, Roberts followed creative instincts that led her to discoveries their systematic approach had missed. How do you decide which hypotheses to test? Asked a bewildered Aquarian researcher after Roberts made her 4th major breakthrough in 2 weeks. I follow the ideas that excite me, Roberts replied. If something makes me curious enough to lose sleep thinking about it, that's usually a sign it's worth investigating. Your people seem to have forgotten that the best science comes from passion, not just methodology. The most dramatic moment came when Captain Taylor himself was challenged to a strategic simulation by the collective's greatest military mind. The irony was not lost on anyone that the galaxy's most peaceful civilization maintained detailed combat simulation systems, ostensibly for historical study. Supreme strategist Yendal had never lost a tactical exercise in over 4 centuries of simulations. His approach was mathematically perfect, relying on optimal positioning, resource management, and logical decision trees that maximized advantage while minimizing risk. When he faced Taylor in a complex multi-ship engagement scenario, he expected another routine victory. What he encountered instead was a human commander who made decisions that seemed to violate every principle of sound tactics. Taylor split his forces when concentration was optimal, took risks that logic suggested were foolish, and relied on coordination between his simulated crew members that required trust rather than calculation. The decisive moment came when Taylor deliberately sacrificed half his fleet to create an opportunity that existed for only seconds. It was the kind of decision that required perfect timing, absolute trust in his subordinates, and the willingness to accept total failure if the gamble did not pay off. When the simulation ended with Taylor's victory, Yendal sat in stunned silence for several minutes. Around the tactical center, collective military observers struggled to process what they had witnessed. "Your strategy was completely illogical," Yendal finally said. "You made decisions that should have led to disaster. How did you know they would succeed?" "I didn't know," Taylor replied. "That was the point. Sometimes the best strategies require accepting uncertainty and trusting in qualities that can't be calculated. Your people have become so focused on avoiding failure that you've forgotten how to achieve the kind of success that requires risk." Dr. Foster monitored the psychological impact of these demonstrations across multiple collective worlds. Her reports back to Earth were both encouraging and alarming. Collective citizens were beginning to show signs of what could only be described as awakening consciousness. They were asking questions that had not been asked in their society for generations. "What were we like before the collective?" a young Draconi had asked during one of the cultural exchanges. "Did my people ever create art like this? Did we ever compete? Did we ever struggle for something better?" The neural suppression arrays were working overtime to manage these dangerous thoughts, but Foster observed that their effectiveness was diminishing. Exposure to human concepts of growth through struggle seemed to be creating a kind of psychological immunity to the suppression technology. Most significantly, other species in collective space were beginning to request their own cultural exchanges with humans. The Aquarian Diplomatic Corps sent a formal invitation for human philosophers to visit their homeworld. The Vorthon merchant houses wanted to learn about human economic competition. Even the mysterious ethereal collective, who rarely interacted with physical beings, requested discussions about human concepts of individual achievement. The Renaissance began quietly on the outer worlds of collective space, where the neural suppression systems were oldest and less sophisticated. On Draconis Prime, former homeworld of the warrior poets, a young engineer named Zektar had spent weeks studying recordings of human demonstrations. Something about their willingness to risk failure in pursuit of excellence resonated with genetic memories that the suppression systems had never quite erased. Working in secret, Zektar began creating poetry that violated every principle of collective artistic harmony. His words spoke of struggle, of the desire to be more than circumstances allowed, of dreams that required conflict to achieve. When he shared his work with others, the response was immediate and unprecedented. For the first time in 8 centuries, Draconi began to remember what their ancestors had been before they chose peace. Similar awakenings were occurring across 12 star systems. Aquarian merchants rediscovered the thrill of competitive trading, pursuing profit not for survival, but for the simple joy of winning. Vorthon scientists began conducting unauthorized experiments, following hunches rather than committee-approved research protocols. Even the ethereal Kethani started manifesting individual personalities distinct from their collective consciousness. Dr. Nina Foster monitored these developments from the Human Embassy on Serenity Prime, documenting the systematic failure of neural suppression technology across the collective. Her reports to Earth painted a picture of a civilization in the early stages of psychological revolution. The suppression systems were designed to prevent specific types of thinking, she explained in her daily transmission to President Hayes, but they were never tested against the concept of voluntary growth through struggle. Human demonstrations aren't triggering violent thoughts. They're inspiring aspirational ones. The technology simply doesn't know how to suppress hope. On Earth, General Carter was coordinating the most unusual military operation in human history. Instead of deploying weapons, Earth's forces were distributing inspiration. Hidden within every human cultural exchange were quantum-encrypted data packets containing historical records of the subjugated species before they joined the collective. These records revealed civilizations of incredible diversity and achievement, all of which had been systematically erased in the name of peace. The breakthrough moment came when Ambassador Veltar himself began to show signs of awakening consciousness. During a routine diplomatic meeting with Ambassador Davis, he made an unprecedented request. "I would like to understand something," he said, his voice carrying a note of uncertainty that Davis had never heard before. "Your people speak of competition as if it were beneficial. Our entire civilization is based on the understanding that competitive instincts lead only to conflict and suffering. How can both perspectives be true? Davis recognized the opportunity she had been waiting for. Would you be willing to experience competition directly, rather than simply observing it? What followed was the most dangerous diplomatic gamble in human history. Davis challenged Veltar to a contest of creative problem-solving, a direct competition where one would succeed and the other would fail. For a being whose entire worldview was based on consensus and shared outcomes, the concept was terrifying and exhilarating. The challenge was broadcast across collective space: develop a solution to the chronic energy shortages affecting the outer colonies. Both competitors would have access to the same resources and information. The winner would be determined by effectiveness and innovation of their proposed solution. Veltar approached the problem with typical collective methodology, forming committees, seeking consensus, and following established protocols. His solution was competent, safe, and entirely predictable. Davis worked alone, took risks, pursued untested theories, and produced a breakthrough that not only solved the energy crisis but opened possibilities for technologies the collective had never imagined. When Davis won, something unprecedented happened. Veltar did not feel the shame or resentment that collective psychology predicted would result from competitive failure. Instead, he felt inspired. He wanted to understand how Davis had achieved what he could not. For the first time in his life, losing made him want to become better rather than simply accept his current limitations. "This feeling," he said wonderingly, "is this what you call motivation?" "That's exactly what we call it," Davis replied. "The desire to improve, to grow, to become more than you were yesterday. Your people gave this up in exchange for contentment, but contentment is not the same as fulfillment." The conversation was being monitored by the Collective Council, and Premier Xanthi realized that they were facing an existential threat to their civilization. The humans were not attacking their society with weapons or propaganda. They were offering alternatives that were proving more attractive than 3 millennia of enforced peace. In an emergency session that lasted 3 days, the council made a decision that would have been unthinkable just months earlier. They voted to activate the ancient protocols, planetary defense systems that had been built in the early days of the collective but never used. These systems would not just suppress aggressive thoughts or competitive instincts, they would completely rewrite the neural patterns of every sentient being in collective space, erasing not just the recent awakening, but all memory that it had ever been possible to choose a different path. Captain Taylor received warning of the impending neural bombardment from an unexpected source. Ambassador Veltar, now fully awakened to the implications of human philosophy, transmitted critical intelligence about the ancient protocols at great personal risk. "You have 18 hours before the systems activate," he warned. "Once they do, every being in collective space will be permanently altered. We will not just return to our previous state of contentment. We will become incapable of ever questioning it again." Taylor faced an impossible decision. His crew could evacuate, leaving billions of newly awakened beings to be lobotomized by their own government. Or they could attempt to stop the most powerful civilization in the galaxy with a single ship and no realistic chance of success. The vote was unanimous: they would stay and fight. What followed was not a traditional space battle, but something the collective had never encountered: asymmetric warfare combined with psychological operations. Commander Ashley Hayes led strike, teams that used human creativity and unpredictability to infiltrate facilities that had been considered impregnable. Dr. Roberts coordinated with awakened collective scientists to sabotage neural suppression arrays from within. Engineer Miller jury-rigged communication devices that could broadcast override codes through the same networks the collective used for mind control. The key moment came when Veltar made the ultimate sacrifice. Using his diplomatic access codes, he opened the central control facility on Serenity Prime, allowing Taylor and a small team to reach the master control system for the ancient protocols. But doing so required him to override centuries of genetic programming and neural conditioning, an act of will that left him permanently changed. Captain Taylor stood before the most sophisticated computer system ever created, capable of rewriting the thoughts and dreams of an entire galaxy. The machine offered him a simple choice: activate the protocols and restore peace to countless worlds, or destroy the system and condemn the galaxy to an uncertain future where beings would struggle, compete, fail, and occasionally achieve greatness. The temptation was real. Taylor could see the appeal of a universe without war, without suffering, without the conflicts that had plagued every civilization in history. But he also remembered what Dr. Foster had told him weeks earlier. Peace, without the possibility of conflict, is just another form of death. He destroyed the system. The explosion that followed did more than eliminate the ancient protocols. It sent a shockwave through every neural suppression array in collective space, permanently disabling the technology that had maintained artificial peace for 3,000 years. Across 12 star systems, billions of beings suddenly found themselves capable of independent thought, competitive instinct, and the dangerous freedom to choose their own paths. 6 months later, Ambassador Davis signed the first trade agreement between Earth and the Free Draconi clans, while in the background reports came in of conflicts erupting across former collective space. Some species were rediscovering old territorial disputes. Others were competing for resources or ideological differences. The galaxy was becoming a more dangerous place. "Do you ever wonder if we did the right thing?" asked Dr. Foster as she watched news reports of the Third Aquarian Trade War. Captain Taylor considered the question while reviewing his final log entry. "We didn't give them war," he said finally. "We gave them choice. Some of them are choosing to fight, but others are choosing to explore, to create, to build something better than what they had before. The galaxy wanted peace, but we showed them that peace without the possibility of conflict is just stagnation wearing a prettier name." In the distance, a newly launched Vorthon exploration vessel fired its engines for the first time in centuries, carrying a crew that had chosen to seek out unknown worlds rather than accept the safety of familiar ones.